Do you need to spend a lot of money to get a quality carbon steel pan, or are the cheaper brands just as good? To answer these questions and find out which brand truly is the best, I tested 8 of the most popular carbon steel pans on the market. After cooking with them for months and comparing all the key specs, I put them through a series of controlled tests. I measured durability by dropping a 5-pound weight from 3 feet high onto the edge of each pan. I tested how fast and evenly they heat by heating them on medium and measuring the center and the edge after 2 minutes. I repeated this test with a thermal camera to see how evenly the heat spreads. I also tested their heat retention by heating them to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and measuring the surface temperature after 5 minutes. I measured the temperature of the handles to see which stayed the coolest after boiling water for 10 minutes. I also measured their non-stick properties by cooking eggs at the same temperature with the same amount of oil and butter. In this video, I break down each carbon steel pan. I'll show you how they performed, what they're best at, and where they fall short. You'll see which brands live up to the hype and which ones aren't worth your money. Toward the end, I provide a handy chart so you can compare all the options side by side. At $45, the Lodge 12-inch carbon steel skillet is the cheapest one I tested. It's made in the USA and comes pre-seasoned, so it's ready to use right out of the box. It has a wide cooking surface, and at 4.3 pounds, it's lighter than the average 12.5-inch carbon steel skillet. The short walls allow moisture to evaporate quickly, which is ideal for browning and searing, but there's not much protection from oil splattering on your cooktop. This Lodge pan performed average in my heat conduction test and slightly above average in my heat retention test. It didn't dent when I dropped the weight on it, although some of the seasoning did come off. The biggest thing you need to know about this pan is that it has the roughest texture of all the pans I tested. The edges of the pan and the handle feel rugged and somewhat sharp. You can buy it with or without a silicone sleeve for the handle, but I highly recommend buying it with the silicone sleeve, because without it, the edges of the handle will dig into your hand. Plus, the handle gets pretty warm if you cook for 10 minutes or more on the stovetop. Despite the rough texture, you can still cook eggs without sticking, but they don't glide as freely as they do on smoother pans. The one positive is that the rougher texture helps seasoning adhere. I've cooked on this pan dozens of times and I haven't had to re-season it, which isn't the case with other pans I've tested. The De Bouillé Blue Carbon Steel 12.5-inch pan is made in France and it costs $80. As its name suggests, the steel goes through a heat treatment process that makes it more corrosion resistant and turns it from gray to dark blue. On the positive side, this pan is lightweight, the walls are high, and the long 10-inch handle is welded. Since there are no rivets, it's slightly easier to clean. This pan sears evenly, performed great in the egg test, and survived my durability test. At 88 degrees, the handle gets warm, but not nearly as hot as Lodge. On the negative side, the handle is uncomfortable and has a steep angle. You need over 7 inches of space between racks to fit it in the oven. The thin, flat design is common across many carbon steel brands, but I'm not a big fan of it because the edges dig into your hand. The second downside is heat retention. Because the construction is relatively thin, it doesn't hold heat as well as thicker pans. It had the 3rd worst heat retention score of the 8 pans I tested. The Matfer carbon steel pan is made in France. It costs $86 and it comes unseasoned. Up until some recent events, which I'll explain in a second, it was America's Test Kitchen's #1 carbon steel pan. This pan has an industrial look and feel. Despite having a smaller diameter, it's heavier than 4 of the 8 pans I tested, and it has the longest handle at 10.2 inches. The walls are short and form a sharp corner with the flat cooking surface. This pan performed average in my heating tests and passed the egg and durability tests. But the most important thing you need to know about this pan is that although it's still available in the US, it's been recalled in France. This pan passed France's national safety standards, but regional regulators found that the pan released excessive levels of arsenic, chromium, and iron when cooked in a highly acidic solution for 2 hours. This goes against the pan's usage instructions, which warn you to avoid acidic foods. Matfer is appealing the recall and says there are no issues if you use the pan properly and avoid acidic foods. But honestly, it's not practical to completely avoid all acidic foods. You don't want a pan that could be unsafe if you accidentally cook certain ingredients, or if someone unaware of the situation uses your pan. Hold off on buying or using this pan until additional testing is done and the appeal is concluded. The De Bouillé Mineral B 12.5-inch pan is made in France It's $110 and it comes unseasoned. Unlike Dubouillet's blue carbon steel pan, this pan doesn't go through the bluing treatment, the walls are slightly shorter, and the handle is attached by 3 rivets instead of being welded. This pan is also 2 pounds heavier and over 1 millimeter thicker. You can buy it with or without a second helper handle, but given it's the second heaviest carbon steel pan I tested, I highly recommend getting the version with the helper handle. The thick, heavy construction results in excellent heat retention, which is ideal for searing and browning meat, and eggs don't stick to the ultra smooth surface. The 5-pound weight barely put a nick on the edge. All that said, this pan has a major limitation. The handle has an epoxy coating that limits its oven-safe temperature to just 400 degrees Fahrenheit for a maximum of 10 minutes. All of the other pans in this video have no time limit in the oven, and most can handle well over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of this, you can't use this pan for roasting or broiling, and you can't season it in the oven. On top of all that, the handle gets hot on the stovetop and has the same flat, uncomfortable design as the others. The made-in 12-inch carbon steel pan is made in Sweden, it comes pre-seasoned, and it costs $129. This pan has the second largest cooking surface, the tallest walls, and it's 1.5 pounds lighter than Dubouillet Mineral B. The curved handle stays cooler than most and has smoother edges than Lodge and Matfer, which makes it slightly more comfortable. This pan performed well in my egg tests, great in my other cooking tests, and passed the durability test. Unfortunately, this pan performed the worst in my heat retention test, and in my heat conduction test, the difference in temperature between the center of the pan and the edge was by far the largest. When I tested it a second time with the thermal camera, it still came in last place. This poor performance is likely because it's the only pan that noticeably warped during testing. After months of cooking, it doesn't sit flat on the cooktop, so it's not making full contact with the heating surface. I've used several other made-in carbon steel pans, and this is the first time I've seen this issue. The Dubouillet Mineral B Pro 12.5-inch pan is made in France, and at $145, it's Dubouillet's most expensive carbon steel pan. The body of the pan is the same as Mineral B, so you get the same thickness, weight, and excellent heat retention. In fact, this pan tied for the best heat retention score. The main difference between Mineral B and Mineral B Pro is the handle. Instead of the epoxy-coated flat handle, you get a polished stainless steel handle that's thicker and has rounded edges that make it much more comfortable. Since there's no epoxy coating on the handle, this pan is oven safe up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit with no time limit. And thanks to its hollow design and heat dispersing cutout, this handle stayed cooler than all of the other ones I tested. Although this pan performs incredibly well, it's pricey, heavy, and the seasoning doesn't adhere well to the slick surface. The rounded handle is much more comfortable than the typical flat handles, but it gets more slippery with an oven mitt or when your hands are wet. The Strata 12.5-inch carbon steel pan is made in China, costs $149, and has the most unique construction I've ever seen in a carbon steel pan. Instead of being made from a single piece of carbon steel, like every other pan in this video, it has 3 bonded layers: a carbon steel cooking surface, an aluminum core, and a stainless steel exterior. This unique construction leads to 3 significant benefits. First, since aluminum is less dense than carbon steel, this pan weighs just 3 pounds. It's the lightest pan I tested by over 1 pound. Second, because aluminum has a higher thermal conductivity than carbon steel, it heats more evenly than traditional carbon steel pans. It had the second smallest temperature difference between the center and the edge in my thermometer test, and performed best in my thermal camera test. Even heating not only gives you consistent results across the entire pan, but it reduces the risk of warping, which can happen when some areas of the pan heat much faster than others. The third benefit of this unique construction has to do with seasoning. Since only the cooking surface is carbon steel, you don't need to season the bottom like you do with traditional carbon steel pans. Beyond all that, this pan has the largest cooking surface, excellent food release properties, and a comfortable handle that stays cool. The walls are sloped instead of straight, making it easier to slide a spatula under food. And it's the only pan with flared rims for easier pouring. All that said, this pan is not perfect. It had the second worst heat retention, and when I dropped the weight on it, it left the largest nick of all the pans I tested. It's also the second most expensive pan, and the only one not made in the USA or Europe. Lastly, since this type of cladded construction is new and patent pending, we don't know how it will hold up over time. The Smithey farmhouse carbon steel skillet is hand forged in Charleston, South Carolina. At $295, it's by far the most expensive pan I tested. This pan has a truly unique look. Each one is pounded out by hand, so no two pieces are exactly alike. The walls and rivets have a distinct hammered texture. There's a small helper handle with Smithey's signature 3 holes, and the main handle has a rustic design inspired by traditional fire tools. This pan is thick and heavy. It's the 3rd heaviest behind the 2 Debouillet Mineral B pans. In terms of performance, it had the smallest temperature difference between the center and the edge in my thermometer test, and the 2nd smallest in my thermal camera test. It also tied with Mineral B Pro for the best heat retention, and the 5-pound weight barely left a mark in my durability test. However, there are some downsides. It has the smallest flat cooking surface of all the pans I tested, although it's hard to measure exactly where it ends since the walls are so sloped. The walls are also the shortest, so your cooktop will get messy. The handle gets pretty warm at 95 degrees, and while it looks cool, it's rounded so it can get slippery. Ultimately, this is a beautiful, high-performing pan, but the price is hard to justify unless you're specifically looking for a handcrafted piece. Now that you know the pros and cons of the top brands, the question is, which carbon steel pans are worth buying and which ones should you avoid? My favorite pans are Strata, Debouillet Mineral B Pro, and Debouillet Blue Carbon Steel. Strata is the best option if you want a lightweight pan that heats evenly. Mineral B Pro is heavy, but it retains heat the best. And the Debouillet Blue Carbon Steel pan gives you great performance at a more reasonable price. Made In, Lodge, and Smithey are solid pans, but they each have drawbacks. Made In can warp, Lodge has a rough texture and uncomfortable handle, and Smithey is incredibly expensive for what it is. The 2 pans I don't recommend are Matfer because of the ongoing recall situation, and Debouillet Mineral B because of the limitations while cooking in the oven. The truth is, all of these pans perform well. The main differences come down to weight, heat retention, and handles. So pick the design that fits your cooking style and budget. This chart comparing all the key specs will help you decide. Pause the video to read. If you're ready to buy, I've linked to each pan in the video description. Those are affiliate links, so I'll earn a commission if you click and buy, but at no extra cost to you. If this video is helpful, check out this video where I test and compare the highest rated Dutch ovens on the market. And for more videos like this, click the logo to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.